When this vehicle first appeared on the battlefield, entire strategies stopped working. Armies that had trained for decades suddenly realized something unsettling. Their tactics were outdated. This wasn't just another armored vehicle. It wasn't an upgrade. It wasn't an evolution. It was a shift. A machine designed not just to survive combat, but to reshape it. Traditional defenses failed. Bold assumptions collapsed. And commanders were forced to rethink how ground wars were even fought. What made this vehicle so different wasn't just its armor, or its firepower, or its technology. It was the way it changed the rules. And once those rules changed, there was no going back. Before this vehicle ever appeared, ground warfare followed rules that felt almost permanent. Armored units advanced in formations that had been studied, practiced, and refined for generations. Infantry moved alongside them. Anti-tank teams waited in predictable positions. Commanders planned battles based on maps, estimates, and delayed information. Everything depended on reaction time. You moved, the enemy reacted, then you reacted again, but there was always uncertainty. Crews often didn't know where the threat was coming from until it was already too late. Missiles appeared from hidden positions. Drones spotted vehicles only after they had exposed themselves. Ambushes worked because chaos worked. And for decades, that chaos was accepted as part of ground combat. Even the most advanced armored vehicles still relied on the same fundamental idea: thick armor in front, weaker armor elsewhere, and hope that crews could respond fast enough. Wars were won by whoever adapted slightly faster than the enemy. But this system had a weakness. It depended on limited awareness. Commanders saw fragments of the battlefield. Crews saw even less. Information moved slowly, often through radio calls and delayed reports. Decisions were made with incomplete data. And that meant mistakes. Ambushes succeeded. Friendly units were surprised. Vehicles were lost not because they were weak, but because they were blind. This wasn't a flaw of training. It was a flaw of the battlefield itself. Until someone asked a dangerous question. What if ground combat vehicles didn't just react? What if they knew? What if threats could be detected before they became visible? What if enemy movements could be predicted instead of guessed? What if the battlefield stopped being chaotic for one side, but remained chaotic for the other? That question led to a vehicle that didn't fit into existing doctrines. Because it wasn't designed to play by the old rules, it was designed to replace them. What truly made this ground combat vehicle a turning point in modern warfare wasn't one breakthrough technology. It was the realization that the battlefield itself had changed. For decades, armored warfare was about strength versus strength. Thicker armor, bigger guns, faster engines. Each new vehicle tried to outmatch the last one physically. But this machine approached the problem from a completely different angle. Instead of asking, how do we survive being hit? Its designers asked, how do we avoid being hit at all? That single question reshaped everything. This vehicle was built around awareness, not just protection. Around anticipation, not reaction. Its sensors weren't just add-ons. They were the core of its identity. Thermal imaging, radar, battlefield data feeds, drone integration, all working together as a single system. For the first time, a ground combat vehicle wasn't just a platform carrying weapons. It was a node in a living network. Inside the vehicle, crews no longer operated blindly. They weren't guessing where threats might be. They were watching them form. Enemy movements appeared on screens before contact. Launch signatures were detected almost instantly. Patterns emerged where chaos once ruled. And when a threat did appear, the vehicle didn't rely on armor alone. Active protection systems reacted faster than any human could. Incoming missiles were detected, tracked, and intercepted in fractions of a second. Weapons that once guaranteed destruction suddenly failed. But perhaps the most profound change wasn't technological, it was psychological. Opposing forces began to realize something unsettling. They were no longer hunting armored vehicles. They were being hunted. Traditional ambush tactics lost their effectiveness. Hiding positions were exposed by sensors and drones. Even terrain that once favored defenders became dangerous. Movement itself became risky. And this created a cascade effect. Anti-tank teams hesitated. Commanders delayed decisions. Coordination broke down under pressure. The battlefield, once chaotic for everyone, became chaotic for only one side. This vehicle didn't need to dominate every engagement. It didn't need to destroy everything in its path. It only needed to disrupt the enemy's confidence. Because when confidence disappears in warfare, mistakes multiply. This was no longer about who had better armor or bigger weapons. It was about who understood the battlefield faster. And once that balance shifted, the outcome of engagements shifted with it. This vehicle didn't replace old tactics overnight. It made them unreliable, and in warfare, unreliability is fatal. The impact of this vehicle didn't end with its deployment. Its true influence began after. Military analysts around the world took notice, not just of its specifications, but of its behavior on the battlefield. It didn't fight like older vehicles. It didn't move blindly. It didn't rely on chance. It didn't wait for contact. It reshaped expectations. Suddenly, armies had to ask uncomfortable questions. What happens when traditional ambushes stop working? What happens when concealment no longer guarantees safety? What happens when information moves faster than weapons? The answers forced a reckoning. Vehicle programs were redesigned, doctrines were rewritten, training focused less on reaction and more on prediction. The idea of the lone armored vehicle began to disappear. In its place emerged a new concept, the connected battlefield. Ground combat was no longer just about steel and fire. It became about data, coordination, and control. This vehicle showed that dominance doesn't come from brute force alone, but from clarity, from seeing the battlefield not as chaos, but as a system. And that lesson spread quickly. Every new armored platform developed after this vehicle carries its influence. Every modern doctrine reflects its philosophy. Even adversaries who cannot replicate it must adapt to it. That is its true legacy. Not that it was unbeatable, not that it was perfect, but that it changed the question. No longer, how thick is the armor? But how much do we know, and how fast do we act? This ground combat vehicle didn't just enter service. It forced the world to prepare for a different kind of war. One where information decides outcomes, where anticipation outweighs reaction, and where control of the battlefield matters more than sheer force. That is why this vehicle didn't simply join modern warfare. It changed it.